Hello everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of I've been tagged in somebody else's video and now I have to answer some questions. Now the video I was tagged in was done by Drewsky Mcgillicuddy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it was related to the Saw franchise, which is a pretty divisive, polarizing franchise nowadays. Obviously I'm willing to acknowledge the flaws of this franchise, but overall I would say I find a lot of enjoyment out of this franchise, and I think it's a little underappreciated. I don't think there's just torture porn to this franchise. I will get into that in a maybe later series of reviews. I think there's a creative force behind this franchise. I do think a lot of the traps are not only creative in the design, but the way they parallel to the victims' vices, the reason they're in the traps. I think a lot of those are pretty clever. I think the writing of the plot, even though it can get convoluted, I mean, at least it showcases an effort to try and elevate Saw beyond just, mindless violence. And many horror franchises are redeemed by their villain, and I think Saw has truly the last great iconic horror villain, at least in terms of franchises. So with that being said, knowing that I'm a fan of the franchise, although I didn't see the very last one, it should be fun going through the questions that have been submitted to me and seeing what I think. Which is your favorite Saw movie and why? Well, the obvious one would be to go with the original. I think that's probably the most well-made of them, and has some of the best acting, writing, and just the emphasis is less on the gore and the traps themselves and rather, the psychological torment that the characters are put through and what that reveals about their characters. So it's a very character-driven as a horror film, and I suppose that's my answer. But I also have really big soft spots for Part 2 and Part 6. You know what? Part 2 is my favorite, actually, because it uses Jigsaw, I think, to a greater advantage by putting Tobin Bell in the spotlight, by giving this a chance for him to really flesh out that character that had been only hinted at in the first movie. And a lot of people think that ruined the mistake, but I think it only added to the lore of this franchise, and I think Tobin Bell did such a fantastic job in creating such a sinister yet understandable villain, and just such a unique villain too. So I'm going to go with Part 2 actually. What are your top 3 Saw traps? I mean, just as plot devices, to instigate conflict, I think the first movie, with the chains, I mean, that really was a catalyst to a lot of great drama for our characters, and it was such a mysterious setup. Just on a cinematic level and how that actually affected the movie, that one was the best utilized trap. But maybe my favorite trap, just from design to execution, would probably be the carousel trap from Part 6. I think that trap is the most excellent in turning the psychology of the victim on its head. Because, you have this guy who runs this, shady healthcare company. He's denied a lot of people coverage. And Jigsaw is really putting his philosophy to the test in the most gruesome, demented way imaginable. And that's what the Saw franchise is to me. So I'm going to have to go with probably that one. And the needle trap in Part 2. I mean, that's just sick. That one makes my skin crawl. So those are my top 3. What is your favorite twist in the franchise? The first twist when you see Jigsaw rise up from the floor with the theme music kicking in. I knew the twist was coming because these movies had been spoiled to me long before I got a chance to see them, but that still gave me goosebumps. Just the filmmaking of it, how dramatic and theatrical it was. And there are some other decent twists along the way. The twist in Part 2 is fine. It's fine. It's not terrible. It's the last twist before we get into the really convoluted era of Saw, where obviously they were just making a bunch of contrivances, and we don't want to talk about that. What do you dislike about Saw? Well, I like the psychological element of Saw. Again, we're taking characters and not just putting them through mindless torture, but we're challenging them in ways specific to their character, and we're testing their philosophies and their actions. And to me, that's a lot more character-driven than many horror films. And I do get confused when people say that Saw is just mindless torture. It's not mindless at all. The traps get very creative, and you gotta at least give them an A for effort. People like to talk shit about the acting in Saw, even though there are plenty of really good performances, really solid performances throughout. But nobody can take away Tobin Bell from that franchise. Nobody can take away the icon that he created and the presence that he gave him. And if there's one thing that I think defined Saw for me and defined its appeal, it would have to be the character of Jigsaw. Going into the dislikes, A lot of those Saw movies were rushed out to production. People were really trying to capitalize on the success. People did sacrifice quality for that capitalization. And I mean, the priority of Saw became less and less about story and character and more about gore and special effects, which, you know, there's an audience for that. And I don't hate those movies, but that's not what brought me to Saw in the first place. Also, this I don't think is really Saw's fault, but it did bring in a new era of horror that I can do very well without. But Saw is not the worst offender in the torture porn category. I don't really consider even the first couple movies to be part of the torture porn genre at all. That's not really fair to hold Saw's feet to the fire on that one, but there's no denying that if Saw hadn't existed, we would have been spared a lot of really terrible movies. Did you predict any of the twists in advance? Well, here's the thing. I wasn't allowed to watch these types of movies as a kid, even though I really wanted to. You know, my parents thought these movies were just torture porn, so they weren't letting me anywhere near it. So the best way I could experience the Saw franchise was, you know, online forums and reviews. So I did have pretty much all of them spoiled for me before I ever saw them, which, you know, sounds like a shame, I know, but I really just wanted to be in on the fun with the Saw franchise, which means I can't say that I predicted any of them because I already knew them. I like to think that I would have been able to predict them at least by, you know, part 4, but, you know, I mean, I'm not really eligible for that question. What would you like to see in a new Saw movie? God, I like Saw a lot, and I don't mind the fact that it became the franchise that it did. But to say I want a new Saw movie, I mean, they would really have to put all their effort into reviving it creatively, into finding a more sensible way to put Tobin Bell in there, because they were really stretching for some of those sequels. I don't know. I guess just put the emphasis back on character. Put the emphasis back on the characters, what they've done, and why they're in these traps, rather than what the traps are doing to them. I guess that's all I have to say. So that's my little tag video for Saw. Now I suppose I have to tag somebody else. I'm going to go ahead and tag Connor McCarthy, that's President CM. Connor, I don't know if you're a fan of these movies. Sorry if I'm putting you through something, but, you know, you're it.